Hello, one and all, and welcome to the gods and lesser beings of Kaldheim. This is Levdev speaking. Anyway, we're actually going to be talking about the top cards of Kaldheim that thought would be fun to talk about in the set. But lucky enough, I actually brought a few guests along to actually help on this journey of the most metal cards that are coming from Kaldheim. First guest that we have is Aziel. Aziel, introduce yourself.
Hello there. I'm Azael, Azael CCG on Twitter. I do a mix of cards and roguelikes, stuff like that, but really, Norse mythology is it's my bread and butter. I love it.
And last, but certainly not least, Machiel.
Hi, I'm Michael1916. You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Twitter predominantly, and I've been playing Magic mostly since 1993.
Splinterelli to the Pepperelli. Now, to clarify for everybody who's watching, what we decided to do is actually come up with our own list of cards. We all compared our list, and we essentially are going to go through. We're going to start with cards that were both on our list, essentially all of on our list, and then we're going to have cards that are on kind of like shared with two content creators list, essentially. And then we're going to get to each of our own individual entries of cards that suited our relative fancy. Nevertheless, we're going to start with a card that we all agree were both on our list because the card is a little. Well, actually, brain fart. Not. We're actually first going to talk about our honorable mentions. Sorry, I kind of jumped the gun there. Anyway, our honorable mentions for me is Giant's Grasp, while for Machiel, it's Jorn, God of Winter, and for Aziel, it is the Reflection of Lijarla. Now I'm going to start with Giant's Grasp. Mostly, I originally had the runes on my list originally, but I kind of changed my mind when I remembered that the Fiend Booster cards were a thing, and I still remember actually really liking this card a lot, especially since it gives giant decks, especially in the Grixis to Jeskai or even Teamer variety, just a mind control. And a mind control is nothing to sneeze at, especially in constructive magic. Any words you want to add, Machiel or Aziel, to the card?
I think you summed it up perfectly.
Splendid.
Yeah.
So, let's brain fart. Let's actually now go to Jorn, God of Winter. And Machiel, why is this on your honorable mentions?
It's just one of those cards where it feels really, really good, especially in a set where snow is already better than standard.
Plus, also, as we kind of mentioned before on our pre-recording, this is just going to be a fun card to mutate on.
Yes.
Aziel, any thoughts on the God of Winter?
It's gonna be great being able to untap all your lands on combat steps.
Oh yeah, especially with Embercleave shenanigans. And of course, the one other good thing is going to be all the Jon Snow references that we're going to have to endure for Standard while this card is in Standard. And Aziel, honorable mention, Reflections of Lijar. So, why did you like this card, Aziel?
Honestly, I'm very fond of copy spells, and this in a tribal deck makes everything into a copy spell.
That is true, especially if you played this like in Merfolk, Giants, and such, just being able to do copy shenanigans. What do you think would be the funnest thing to copy, Machiel?
Honestly, don't know at the moment. Probably dragons and go with Goldspan and Terror of the Peaks.
You know what I think would be the funniest? Slitters. Slitters, I think is how you're pronouncing it.
Ooh.
Eldrazi.
Ooh,
Well,
yeah.
if we're going that route, Changeling.
Can we even? Oh yeah, you can
You,
name
you
Changeling.
can name Shapeshifter.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can actually name Shapeshifter. So, moving on, that's our honorable mentions. Now let's actually get to our quote unquote list, but let's first talk about the cards that we both had a similar liking to. So, the first card on this list that we're both on all of our lists, and as you can see here, we're going to have our symbol icons on the right to tell you which cards are on our list kind of scenario, or, kind of like which ones had this card in their list. We all agree that on our list was Dream Devolver. One in a black for a Demon Cleric. 0 free. Each non-land card in your hand without Foretell has Foretell. That's absurd. Its foretell cost is equal to its mana cost, reduced by 2, and whenever you foretell a card, Dream Developer gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Now, the first thing I'm going to say about this card, the fact that this card allows us to make any card have foretell, ridiculously absurd. Like, this is a very powerful effect that I think a lot of people are going to sleep on, especially since it combos with another card we're going to be talking about later on the list, but I just love this card just because it allows us to make a lot of later game to mid-range spells or even kicker spells be able to be cast for cheaper as long as you're willing to foretell it earlier. Plus, it's also Demon or Cleric, so you could put this in the Demon Cleric tribal list and make your Demon Cleric spells have foretell. That's nothing to sneeze at. I actually just really like this card in general. So, Aziel, what's your take on the Dream Devourer?
I'm planning some shenanigans with this thing because, one, it gets around, like, discard decks, and you'll basically have an extra hand sitting off to the side when you foretell these cards.
That is actually a good point. That is the one nifty thing about foretell. It does essentially help protect your hand and such, which is kind of nice. Maciel, what's your take on why you put Dream Devourer on the list?
Liliana's contract.
Demon tribal shenanigans. And also discount the that spell as well with foretell, which is actually pretty nice.
Yes, and also with the new changelings that we have that are also demons, you can make them free to play.
Oh, now that is really, really nice. I can't wait to see what people's shenanigans are with this card. Nevertheless, I can't wait to do some ramping or some jank brewing with this card. Nevertheless, next on the list that we all agree that was a good card that's been on our list, Cosima, God of the Voyage, as well as the Omen Kill. Just to make sure I don't have to read all this, basically what it summarizes, if you play Cosima at the beginning of your next upkeep, where Cosima's on the battlefield, you can exile it with a Voyage counter, or exile it essentially, and then anytime you play a land while it's exiled, it gets a Voyage counter. And then anytime you do play that land, you could return it back with X counters, as well as draw X cards, where X is the number of Voyage counters on it. But you also have the choice of, since it's an MDFC, to make it the Omen Kill. 1 in a blue for a 3/3 vehicle. Whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library. So this can mill from up to 3, as the Omen Kill could do. Or if you go into Historic, I don't know, like the biggest vehicle we have, like you can mill a lot of cards with this. Well, semi-mill, so to speak, because you're not milling, you're exiling. But then being able to, and then with any of those cards you exile, you may play lands from among those cards as long as they remain exile. Oh, and it also has a crew of 1, which is why this card is absurd. Anyway, I just like Cosima because I just love the flavor of this card on both sides. The factor is, essentially, Cosima is voyaging around, exploring new lands, as pretty much is showing when we play lands, exploring new territory and such, and gaining experience from it. You could also say that is flavored with the Omen Kill as well as just being able to explore your opponent's deck and explore new lands from your opponent's deck. And then the minute that they decide to return from the journey, you get X experience. You get like the mechanical reinforcement of being going on a journey by the card draw, as well as getting bigger. I just love the flavor of this card. Plus, it has some really absurd shenanigans, especially in decks with Teferi's Tutelage. Just saying. Anyway, Aziel, why is Cosima on your list?
I'm thinking of this card in a landfall deck, actually, because you're already playing multiple lands in a turn. Every time a land hits the battlefield, another counter gets put on Cosima. And then once you run out of lands, she just comes back huge and draws most of your deck.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Maciel, your take on why it's on the list?
Double striking vehicles with Omen Keel and card draw shenanigans with Cosima.
That I could definitely see. So we both agree it's going to have some card draw, but it's also going to have some milling opportunities as well.
Sorry. I will actually interject with for the landfall shenanigans, Morog with vehicles.
Oh yes, that. Oh dear, that's Okay, I gotta put that on one of my Jink Brew list shenanigans, because that's actually pretty funny. Anyway, moving on, this next selection is actually one that's both on my list as well as Machiel's list, and it's probably going to be the best board wipe in Standard. Doomskar, a 5-mana sorcery, but it's destroy all creatures, but you can foretell it, and it can cost, its foretell cost is free mana. This is one that's pretty easy to explain. A free mana board wipe, it's nothing to underestimate. Yes, you're investing 2 mana into it, but majority of control decks can invest their mana early and such on turn 2 to hold up this effect. And also the fact that we have a bunch of good foretell cards in the meta does make this a little bit tricky, because your opponent could be like, are they playing a really good board wipe, or are they playing this spell and such, so the mental mind games is nice. But just having a free mana board wipe that can be cast at any turn as early as turn 3 or later if needed, nothing to underestimate. So Machiel, why is Doomskar on your list?
I think it's quite possibly one of the best Wraths that's ever been printed, and I think that it synergizes incredibly well with a card that I had on our original list of cards to play out.
Right. So, it's safe to say this one's pretty easy. It's just a really, really powerful board wipe. It's just going to see a lot of play. Next up, this one is actually on my list, but also on Aziel's list, the Cosmos Charger, which, by the way, keep in mind Dream Devourer, this is the card I was mentioning the combos with. Free and a blue for a free flash flying horse spirit. Other words, art is gorgeous, but the most important part, foretelling cards from your hand costs 1 less and can be done on any player's turn. Oh, and also has a foretell cost of 2 and a blue, just in case if you want to just essentially make this cheaper. Now, this synergizes with Dream Developer ridiculously well, because the fact that you can instant speed foretell is nothing to sneeze at. Plus, also keep in mind, you can clone this, or if you can get a second copy, which, lucky enough, we have a ton of clone spells in the format, as well as spells that, legendary creatures that help us clone stuff, which we can talk about later. Essentially, just being able to get 2 copies on this battlefield and make your foretell 0. There is literally a commander that its basic catch-22 is the fact that it makes your foretell spells cost 0. So, I feel like this is going to be a very powerful ramp type effect. I definitely can't wait to see like a Dimir kind of like Foretold list that tries this out. So, Aziel, why is Cosmos Charger on your list?
I just think, honestly, it's a funny card. It's going to be doing a whole lot of stuff. As you said with the Dream Devourer, you can literally be dropping nearly any powerful card way earlier than you should be able to. And something Michael pointed out on our Lost recording, it's the horse is Sleipnir.
Right. Oh boy. There's actually, yeah, that horse is definitely doing that effect, so that's actually really cool. Machiel, any thoughts on Cosmos Charger?
I just realized that it has 6 legs.
Yep. I think it's supposed to represent the fact that it's galloping, or maybe it does have 6 legs.
It does. It's part of the Norse mythology. That's Odin's horse.
And now we know. And that's why having someone that knows Norse mythology is great to have on a top cards of Kaldheim list. Anyway, moving on. We're going to talk about another card that me and Aziel actually liked a lot, and that is Esika, God of the Tree. 1 and 2 green for a 1/4 with Vigilance. It has add 1 mana of any color. Other legendary creatures you control have Vigilance and add 1 mana of any color. But it can also be the Prismatic Bridge, which is Ruberg, white, blue, black, red, and green for a legendary enchantment. And it has, at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, personally, I just like this effect because the ramifications of it in Standard is actually really, really good. Making all your legendary creatures into mana dorks is nothing to sneeze at, especially since we still have Keenan in the format. And since Keenan doubles your mana from your mana dorks and such, and it's a legendary creature as well, I just feel like there's some shenanigans you can do along that line, and there's even stuff that you can do within the confines of the set. Like if you play like Magda, which is barely got on my list, but I was close to putting it on the list, which essentially makes it whenever you tap a dwarf and she's a dwarf herself, you make a treasure. You can have her, she's a legendary creature, so you can play that turn 2, play Eska on turn 3, and then now make it where anytime you tap Magda for mana, you're also going to generate a treasure. That's going to end up doing some funny ramp shenanigans, I feel. Plus, it's safe to say that if you could get to the Prismatic Bridge and you have very powerful spells you don't mind casting for the low, low price of free, that is nothing to underestimate. So, Aziel, why is Eska God of the Tree on the list for you?
Very simply, I am building a God's Tribal EDH deck. It's going to be every single god printed, which has mounted up to about 47 gods.
And it'll just be fun to use those gods as mana dorks, as well as getting them free with the Prismatic Bridge.
Yup.
Oh, the shenanigans that will provide. So, any thoughts on Eska or the Prismatic Bridge, Aziel? Or not Aziel, but Makiel.
I view this as an easier to cast and slightly more fixed Kethis, and also Sakashima Tribal clone copies for the Prismatic Bridge side, so you can have a ton of them.
There's definitely some shenanigans you can do with that. So, nevertheless, Eska, a fun card on the list. Now, this one, it was actually not originally on my list, so it's actually both your guys' cards that was on your list. Even though, personally, I do love this card. Orvar the Orform, 3 and a blue for a legendary creature shapeshifter. It's a changeling, so it can be anything, dwarf, dragon, you name it. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. And then when a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. So, Aziel, why is Orvar on your list?
Copies. Honestly, think about it. Anything that targets your creatures, they're going to get copied as long as you cast that spell. So, say you have a board wipe spell that pings everything for 1 and your creatures have higher than 1 toughness. You've just cloned your entire board while taking out their goblins, elves, what have you. Or you can do things like cast a clone spell like a Replicate, and then it gets you 2 clones for the price of 1.
Very nice. So, Makiel, why do you have Orvar on your list?
A lot of copy shenanigans.
I think it's safe to say we're all going to have a lot of copy shenanigans with this card. Personally, I just like it because it makes any of your combat trick spells or removal spells that are like Prey Upon or Rapid Bite become copy spells as well, which is actually really, really cool.
Yes.
And nevertheless, Orvar, it's definitely fun. You know a set's going to be fun when the most exciting commander of the set for a lot of people is a monocolored commander. Anyway, moving on. Another card that was actually on Orvar lists, but I thought I would jump it here because I thought it was a funny combo of Orvar. Mystic Reflection, 1 in the blue. Choose target non-legendary creature. Next time one or more creature or planeswalkers into the battlefield, this turn they enter as copies of the chosen creature. So, I personally have this on my list just because, oh dear, the fact that this can be used as a defensive tool is very, very nice. Your opponent tries to cast a Vorinclex or an Ugin or any high powerful threat, as long as you have like a 1/1 or any just non-legendary creature on the battlefield, boop, it becomes a servo. Boop, it becomes a human token. Boop, it becomes an elf. As long as you can keep a constant board presence of non-legendary creatures, I do feel like this is a really good defensive tool. Now, Aziel, why is Mystic Reflection on your list?
I want to use it more as a token crafting tool. Take your small tokens, make them into something that's much scarier than they would be.
I definitely can see that. Makiel, your take?
I do like the idea of using it defensively as a control piece, but I also very much like the idea of mass reanimation and/or if we're going into EDH, the Avenger of Zendikar.
Right. Oh boy. That's going to be a lot of plants. And a lot of Avenger of Zendikars.
Yes. Very, very many.
Oh dear. And not to mention Terror of the Peaks is a card, so yeah. Nevertheless, Mystic Reflection is definitely going to have some shenanigans in the format. Next up, we're actually now going to get to the cards that we individually are on our list, but are not on the other list. For me, one of my cards that's on the list, and I love this card, Savarla the Ice Shaper. Free mana, 1 green and a red, for a legendary snow creature troll warrior. It's a 2/4, and it has an activated ability of free and tap it. Create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Manalith with add 1 mana of any color. And then it has an activated ability of 8 mana. Yes, it's a lot. And then tap it to look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may cast a spell, singular spell, from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest in the bottom of the library in a random order. Now, the reason why this card is on my list is kind of like an EDH reason. This is actually a card that's going to be very, very perfect for my Tazri party list. Mostly because it's 5-color shenanigans. Being able to use this card to create a Manalith is very nice to help us for filtering. / also just it's a warrior itself, which helps add to the party. Also, it does just silly shenanigans if you can get to the second activated ability, just being able to cast maybe one of the more powerful spells in my deck for free. Nothing to underrate. I think it also has some funny shenanigans in Standard, at the very least, especially if you can get into like a Gruul ramp list of sorts. I'm really curious to see if somebody can use this in Standard to an interesting application. Nevertheless, any thoughts on this card, Aziel?
As you said, I think it's going to be really fun in EDH primarily because you're basically creating mana rocks every turn, and if you have a way to tap out 3 mana and untap things, well, then you're creating infinite mana rocks.
Right. Maciel, any takes on the Ice Shaper?
4-color snow. Svella, Yorn, Morog.
Right. Oh, yeah, because it untaps your Icy Manaliths. Nice.
Well, with infinite combat steps of Morog, you untap all of your snow permanents every time that Yorn attacks.
Oh, you're right. Oh, dear, that is... Oh, I really gotta put that. Like, yeah, that's definitely going to be maybe an early access, or at the very least a Brewing Labs episode. Nevertheless, next card that this time on Asiel's list, it's Toski, the Bearer of Secrets, the legendary creature Squirrel. This spell can't be countered. It's indestructible. It attacks each combat if able, as well as whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player. Draw a card, and for the record, yes, this is a green ability. We've seen many green cards in the past that does this, just for the record. Anyway, Aziel, why is Toski Bearer of Secrets on your list?
First off, it is a proper black border squirrel commander, which I've been wanting for so long. I kind of wish it was 3-color, like green, black, and white, so it could play every squirrel, but I'm good with the green squirrels. That's where they're primarily at. It also enables those kind of decks because squirrel deck, you're making a lot of tokens, and when those tokens deal damage, you're drawing a lot of cards, and you're repeating the process. But the best part is that Toski is a little bit of a mix of Ratatosk and Tyr, because if you look at his little hand, he's missing his claw.
Ah. That's actually a nice touch there. So, Maciel, any thoughts on Toski?
I will build this as an EDH deck where I mill myself out. At the same time, I wipe the table.
Nice. As for me, I'll just say this is probably one of the funniest mutate targets ever. Mutate the squirrel! Anyway, Toski Bear of the Secrets, there's definitely going to be some nutty shenanigans you are going to provide for Standard as well as EDH. Next up, Maciel. This is a card that was on your list, Righteous Valkyrie. 2 and a white for a creature angel cleric. It's a 2/4, it has flying, and it has whenever another angel or cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And then as long as you at least have 7 life more than your starting life total, creatures you control get +2/+2. So, why was this on your list, Maciel?
Because angels and clerics are both really good at gaining life, especially right now in current standard. You have Orzhov as a way to go about it, and this has a double anthem effect built into it for only 7 life above 20.
Nice. That is very true. And it's nice that how the Anthem effect does complement the card well to help gain more life, which is really nice.
As well as the angel that was just printed, I believe, in Zendikar, that you gain life when you attack your opponent.
Yeah, Angel of Destiny. I think
Yeah.
it's the name.
I believe so. Paired along with this and the other incidental angels, feels pretty good.
Aziel, your take on Righteous Valkyrie?
I'm just thinking of this thing with in one of them big old laser tower decks in I think yeah, it's in historic.
Are we
It's
talking
also
about
loading
Averfrot's Reservoir?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yes. Now, if there was
Because
only...
that toughness that toughness thing is nothing to sneeze at. That will get you up there real quick.
True. And now only if Averfrot's Reservoir was an angel or a cleric. But, yeah,
It's possible.
it is possible. Anyway, other than that, I would say the last thought I would say is this is also a fun reanimation target with some of the popular spells in the format, such as, for example, Return of the Dark Dwellers, I think it's called. What's the Call of the Dark Dwellers, where then now you have this angel returning in, gaining the life. Well, you're not getting the life, you have to return another angel to do that, but still, making this a flying Death Touch menace, that's pretty good. Pretty good in my opinion. Anyway, nevertheless, Righteous Valkyrie, definitely one of the more powerful free drops we've seen, so it's definitely going to see some play, especially with the life gain shenanigans we currently have in Standard. Now, another card that I think is going to see some play, though you can make a debate on it, Vorinclex Monstrous Raider. Hey, we have Phyrexians again. Oh boy. It's a sit-sits with Trample and Haste. If you would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many each of those counters on that permanent or player instead. And if an opponent would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, that player puts half that many each of those kind of counters on the permanent or player instead, rounded down. So if your opponent tries to put one counter on something as this creature's on the battlefield, that counter gets negated. Or it goes half, like if you put 2, it's 1, etc., etc. I just love this card because there's just so much janky shenanigans you can do with this. Now, at first glance, at 6 mana, Trample and Haste, nothing to sneeze at. That's a pretty good mid-range threat. But the factor is we have so many counter-based shenanigans and counter interactions in Standard that jive well with this card, nothing to underestimate. Like, for example, with Sagas, you being able to, essentially, if you play a Saga with Vorinclex on the battlefield, get Step 1 and Step 2 activated since you're putting 2 lore counters on it. Very silly, especially with some of the powerful Sagas that we're getting in the set, that's also as well that's currently in Standard. Also, this doubles up Planeswalker counters when they enter the battlefields, and we do have a few powerful Planeswalkers, one I'm going to talk about that's upcoming on the list, that is very powerful when you can get to its ultimate. Now, the one that missed the list a little berry, but actually Machiel didn't mention about it, Tyvar, very silly to get to the ultimate very easy with this card. But there's also stuff like the Garruk from M21. There's just a lot of Planeswalkers that, as long as it enters the battlefield with Vorinclex, you can get doubled counters, activate the ultimate immediately, and just get a serious advantage. Not to mention any counter-based shenanigans like with the Great Hinge, just being able to have the Great Hinge on the battlefield, cast this, and then make it an 8/8 Trample Haste and draw a card, nothing to sneeze at. So, Aziel, any thoughts on Vorinclex?
It's gonna do a lot of work with counters, but the thing I'm most excited about is the I believe it was M21 Teferi.
Oh, and getting closer to get extra 2 turns.
Extra 2 turns and then bump it up to, well, you're basically going infinite turns at that point.
Nice. Machiel, your take?
Any deck that runs this hoses itself when it runs across 9 lives.
Ooh, that is a good point, because 9 lives does... Yeah, that's a good point. Oh boy. Maybe that will be good historic tech if Vorinclex becomes a popular card. Nevertheless, I'm excited to try out the shenanigans, even though we are still ridiculously confused why a Praetor is on a Kaldheim.
Oh, there's actually a little hint in his description. It mentions that when he arrived on the plane, all his organic material was dissolved, And so all that was left was his like Phyrexian base inorganic bits, and he had to reform himself by essentially sucking in an animal that happened to run across his remains,
So
which gives Tezzeret hints.
Right. Darn it, Tezzeret. So Phyrexians are pretty much now the thing.
I think Phyrexians have always been the thing.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Ever since Urza.
Anyway, moving on. We're actually going to talk about a card that's on Aziel's list, and it is another mythic. It's the Haunting Voyage. 6 mana for sorcery. Choose a creature type. Return up to 2 creature cards of that type from your graveyard to the battlefield. But wait, it can't be foretold for 7 mana. Why? Well, if the spell was foretold, return all creature cards of that type from your graveyard to the battlefield instead. So, Aziel, why is Haunting Voyage on your list?
Because I love tribal decks and bringing back everything. It's beautiful.
Yeah, like, and the fact is, there's one card that I think heavily synergizes with this card on my list, so can't wait to talk about it. But nevertheless, it's definitely going to be fun to do some mass reanimator shenanigans, especially if you play like a Sir Grim list of sorts, like being able to return so many cards from your graveyard and painting your opponent. Maciel, any thoughts on the voyage that it's haunting?
This does pair well with Reflections.
Ooh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, there's some shenanigans you could do with that. Ooh, the Haunting Voyage. Every EDH player's dream mass reanimation spell. Anyway, moving on. We're going to talk about a card that was on your list, which is the Ascendant Spirit. So, Snow Creature Spirit, it has a few activated abilities. 2 Snow, becomes a Spirit Warrior with base power and toughness 2 free. Free Snow, if this is a warrior, put a flying counter on it and becomes a Spirit Warrior Angel with base power and toughness 4/4. Or 4 Snow, if this is an angel, put 2/1/1 counters on it and it gains. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So, Maciel, why is this Snowy Spirit on your list?
It reminded me of Warden of the East Tree and Figure of Destiny, both of which saw significant play in their respective formats. And I think that this is one of those cards where if your opponent doesn't remove it quickly, then it's just going to keep coming back.
Yeah, and I would argue that if you could put this like in an Esper list with Lurrus, you can, even if it gets removed, bring it back with Lurrus, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. Oh, that Nightmare Cat.
I just thought of something.
What you thought of?
So, you don't have to activate these abilities in order. So,
No,
if you...
you do.
Do you?
Yes, they are prefaced with if. So you can only do 2 if the first one has been done. You can only do 3
Well,
if the second one has been done.
Well,
I
you
think
can
what...
change its type.
Yeah, I see where Aziel's going with this. Like, you could change the creature type in other ways. Like, let's say, for example, if you give it like that... If you give this card Changeling, for example, and make it all creature types, then you can cheap cut to the activated ability really quick.
That is true.
Or there's even that one Orzhov saga where you can return a target creature from your graveyard and make it into an Angel Warrior with a flying counter on it, so then you can go straight to the 4 Snow stuff.
That is true.
So, yeah. There's definitely some shenanigans you can do with that. Any thoughts on it, Aziel, other than what you mentioned there?
I just wanted dumb things like that. Not necessarily the most streamlined way of doing things, but I want to see if it's possible to pull off.
I definitely can see that. And another thing to keep in mind, you can mutate on this, so... the mutate shenanigans. Anyway, moving on. We'll get to a card that's on my list, which I am really excited for. Kaya the Inexorable. Also, I called it that Vorinclex was in the background art. Anyways, 5 mana for a legendary Planeswalker Kaya. It's 5 loyalty. +1, put a ghost form counter up to 1 target non-token creature. It gains when this creature dies or is put into exile. Return it to the owner's hand and create a +1/+1, or not +1/+1, a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. -3, exile target non-land permanent. Honestly, probably be the most played aspect of the card. but it also has -7. You get an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a legendary spell from your hand, from your graveyard, or from among cards you own in exile without paying its mana cost. Oh, I love this card so much because there's so much jank you could do with this. Well, first of all, let's go with the spiky application. First of all, this is going to be an obvious in either Orzhov or Mardu or any card that has white and black control list, because just 5 mana, remove the most problematic creature or problematic permanent on the battlefield, exile it, very nice. I also like the +1 a lot because we do have a lot of powerful ETB creatures in the format, as well as just adventure spells still in the format. So being able to put a ghost form counter on it, and then when your creature gets removed from either exile or destruction, being able to return it back to your hand and then still get a body presence on the battlefield with the spirit tokens, nothing to sneeze at. Also, the ultimate is a lot easier to get to, especially when it's at 5 loyalty, especially since it can be doubled by a certain special card called Vorinclex. And getting to that ultimate is absurd. Like, if you just ultimate it, like, when it's at 7 loyalty, you can literally just cast Kaya again at the beginning of your upkeep. That's a very powerful effect. We have been seeing a lot of powerful legendaries currently in Standard and upcoming into Standard, thanks to Kaldheim. So I am really excited to play this in Mardu control. That is just my most excited thing to do with this card. Aziel, any thoughts on Kaya?
My thought process is put this Kaya into a 5-color Super Friends deck in EDH or Standard, actually. There's going to be a good few Planeswalkers in Standard, but in EDH you can do things like Chain Veil and Oath of Teferi.
Oh, oh, that's going to do some Atraxa jank, I can tell you that right off the bat. Machiel, any thoughts on Kaya?
I think the best thing about it is the +1 with the synergy on Lurrus.
That is true. That is actually very true. With Lurrus, that's actually pretty good. That's actually really cool. Okay, so moving on, we're actually going to talk about a Planeswalker that Aziel is anticipating for from the set, which is Niko Aris. It's white, blue for a legendary Planeswalker Niko. It has, when it enters the battlefield, create its shard tokens. Which, for the record, since it doesn't show on here, what a shard token is, it's an enchantment that you can sacrifice for 2 mana to scry 1 and draw a card, for the record. But it has these activated abilities. +1, up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Whenever this creature deals damage this turn, return it to its owner's hand. It also has -1. Niko Aris deals 2 damage to target tapped creature for each card you draw on this turn. And it also has a -1, create a shard token. So, Aziel, why is Niko Aris on your list?
Honestly, it's because the Enchantress applications, they have really great Enchantress applications.
Yeah, there's definitely the fact that you can make a lot of enchantments from this is really nice. Machiel, your take?
I'm still upset that people didn't get my joke on Twitter about the Pokehedrons.
I will say, though, this is going to synergize very well in a Bant list with Cetacean Champion. I'm going to say that right off the bat.
Incredibly well.
Also, don't sneeze at Don't sneeze at their activated abilities. Just +1. It's kind of like Kaya in the sense that being able to repeat an ETB effect or an adventure spell, nothing to underestimate, and also get a few points of damage in. Also, -1, dealing 2 damage to target tap creature for each card you draw on this turn. That doesn't sound exciting until you realize you're in Azorius and you're going to draw a lot of cards in Azorius, just by through the spells that Azorius run in general. Plus, also there is that Teferi's, not tutelage, but Teferi's, like, staff, I'm forgetting the name of it, like, the 4-cost enchantment that whenever you draw a card, you draw an additional card, so stuff like that. And -1, yet again, creating another shard token will help with the Enchantless / also Cetacean Champion builds. So, they're going to be a very fun Planeswalker to see in the meta. I can't wait to see what happens. Anyway, moving on. This is actually one that's on your list, Machiel, and that is the Clarion Spirit. So, it's a 2-mana 2/2, and it has whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So, why was this on your list?
This actually started off as an honorable mention, and I think in standard it's going to do some work, especially with slogging control matchups where you're just reacting. But in multiplayer formats like EDH, I think that this is going to be a very fun card to get a board advantage while you're just cantripping through your deck and gaining life and drawing cards.
I definitely can see that. Aziel, your take on Spirit?
I think that this one in particular will be really fun in Kaikar Spirits.
I definitely can see that. So, oh, darn it. Hang on, let me get back to the previous slide. Little foreshadowing there. As for me, I just kind of like it because there is some shenanigans you can do in EDH with, like, Divine Visitation and such. So being able to make those spirits into angels, very nice. Plus, also, if you're running Spirit Tribal, this is a spirit that makes more spirits. That's nothing to sneeze at. Nevertheless, it'll be fun to see how this spirit clarions. Okay, that pun did not work, but at least I tried. Now, onto a very, very scary card on my list. That's going to be scary for EDH, as well as potentially standard. Tergrid, God of Fright. Very fitting. 5 mana for a legendary creature god. It has Menace. It's a 4/5, and whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. But wait, there's more. There's Tergrid's Lantern, free and a black for a legendary artifact that has target. You can tap it for target player loses free life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discards a card. Oh, and you can spend free and a black to untap it and repeat this effect again. Now, that backside alone for EDH is horrifying. Because if we have any infinite mana designs within your deck design that can make infinite mana and make sure that it has infinite black mana within the mana pool, this is just an alternate win condition. Just being able to use your infinite mana to untap this and then just repeat this effect over and over, make your opponent have to sacrifice all their fiends and lose life to the point that they lose. That's a very, very scary effect. And for standard, I just think the front application is scary. Just because we have cards like, essentially the one I could think of is Mythos of Snapdats, or essentially you could have Tergrid God of Fright, you play Mythos of Snapdats, you force your opponent to sacrifice the things they probably don't want to sack since you can choose what they sack, essentially if you pay the Mardu cost for it, essentially, in its casting cost, and then now get all your opponent's stuff. Plus, it synergizes well whenever your opponent tries to sack with a land like, I don't know, Fabled Passage. Yeah, this card is scary. Aziel, your take on the God of Fright?
So, I actually am planning on making a Tergrid deck for just those tables that are utterly miserable in EDH. But in Standard, I'm going to be making a deck with it revolving around Dream Devourer, Reanimation, and discarding their things, because you can get this thing super early, and if you reanimate it from your own graveyard, you're probably paying less.
That is very true. Maciel, your take on the God of Fright?
So I love it. In standard, I would slap a Cavern Whisper on it as soon as I could to make my opponents discard and get their
Ooh.
stuff.
Ooh. I think Cavern
And then
Whisperer is the one that sacks, actually.
No, that's Chittering Harvester.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Brain fart.
But in EDH, Torment of Hailfire.
Oh, dear, that's gross.
Take the whole table out.
And get all their stuff if you don't finish someone off. Oy.
Yep.
So yeah, God of Fright, for many people it's probably going to be the God of Salt in EDH. But we'll wait and see. Now, on your list, Maciel, is the Rise of the Dreadmarn. 2 and a black for an instant. Create Et's 2/2 black zombie berserker creature tokens, where Et's is the number of non-token creatures that died this turn, but it also has a foretell cost of 1 black mana. So, why is this on your list, Maciel?
Because I really like Doomscar, and this pairs incredibly well no matter whom is playing the Doomscar.
That is very true. This is a way to pretty much provide your insurance when you do the board whites, which is actually a very nice touch.
Yes, and if your opponent thinks they have the upper hand and they wipe the board, you play this and then untap.
Ooh, and then have a zombie army of zombie berserkers. Nice. Aziel, your take on Rise of the Dreadmarn?
I think I'm going to need I'm going to need to get a copy for the EDH deck that I probably have to grab for my brother because he never uses it. He's just got it in his storage.
Which
But I made him a zombie tribal EDH deck with that Varina.
Oh, yeah.
Is that the name?
Yeah, the one that essentially you can make zombie tokens when you discard, I believe. I
think.
know which one you're talking about. I know. The Esper one, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would actually be a nice addition to the list, as well as Doomscar. So yeah, Rise of the Dreadmarn, it's going to make a lot of zombies. A lot of zombies. Now, a card that's on my list, and it's probably one of my favorite cards of the set. I am so excited for this card. Mask Ward Nexus. 4 mana for an artifact. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creatures you own that aren't on the battlefield. And also it has an activated ability of free mana to just create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. Oh dear, there is so much jank you could do with this card, it's not even funny. Well, it is fun, but it's just... Where do I begin? Like, there's that conspicuous snoop for goblins, so making all your creatures into goblins and being able to play them from the top of your library, that's really good. All the tribal lords that we have currently in standard, just being able to make all of them synergize with one another, that's really good. You can even just like play the cat dog deck, Rin and Ciri, and then make it where your cats are dogs and your dogs are cats, and then they activate each other, making double tokens. It's just, oh, there's so much jank you can do with this card. I love it. This is probably one of my favorite cards of the set. So, Aziel, your thoughts?
As you were saying that, I had a new thought on the card. Muxus.
Oh.
You could play one of the few Eldrazi in Historic with Muxus.
Ulamog is a really big goblin then.
Yup.
And then give it haste. Oh dear. Machiel, your take on the Nexus?
I wish that it used the 2/2 colorless Changeling Shapeshifter token from Modern Horizons instead of this blue Shapeshifter, because the only other type of this effect is already in blue. I feel like this could have stayed colorless entirely.
Right. I could definitely see that. Nevertheless, we're going to make some shapeshifters. We're going to do some shenanigans. I can't wait. This is probably going to be the cornucopia of a lot of my Brewing Labs list. It's definitely just going to be in it, even though it's probably going to be eaten by a Gym Razor or Skyclave Apparition probably one too many times. And the last card on the quote-unquote video, as well as the card that's on your list, Goldspan Dragon. 5 mana for a 4/4 creature dragon with flying and haste. It has, whenever this creature attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. Oh, and by the way, your treasures you control have tap to sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. So, Machiel, why is Goldspan Dragon the last card on your list?
Because I very much plan to use this in a bunch of cantrips to have near infinite mana in Standard, and pair it with Terror of the Peaks.
Definitely understandable. Aziel, any thoughts on the dragon?
I kind of want to pair it with Orvar the Allform.
I definitely can see that. That's actually a cool way to think about that card. And
Is it shenanigans?
is it
like
shenanigans? And so many dragons. So many dragons. As for me, I just love this card personally because it makes one of those really cool combat trick spells, aka protecting your creatures with indestructibility, a lot more playable now, because being able to essentially, anytime it gets targeted or attacks, generate the treasure, which then gives you just enough mana to be able to activate those combat trick spells, like you can God's Willing, you can Heroic Intervention, you can do a lot of things to protect this card. So just as an aggressive threat that can protect itself relatively easy in the right list, Very, very nice. Plus, you can also mutate on this and get the treasures, so... I'm going to sound like a broken record by saying how many times you can mutate on stuff. Nevertheless, that is the cards that we are so excited for coming from Kaldheim. Nevertheless, any last thoughts before we conclude, Aziel?
Here's my last thought. You can have Auravar out with the gold span and fling the gold span, and you will never run out of gold span.
Ah, that is so good.
I dig it.
I dig it. Maciel, any last thoughts?
Honestly, at this point, I'm just really excited to get to play with these cards, which I think all three of us get to do in a few days from now, possibly.
Which is a fun conclusion, final thought. For us, we're actually going to participate in the early access event in a few days from now, where we're going to essentially get a... Wizard of the Coast is going to provide us each a full account with the cards from the set, and we're just going to do some fun drink brewing shenanigans. Nevertheless, I want to thank Aziel and Maciel for being on this collaboration video. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the patience of doing the second recording since the first one kind of went a little bit off.
Glad to have been here, and we'll record as many times as necessary, my friend.
Even if it's 1,000?
I mean, we'll get there eventually.
Well, anyway, Aziel, any response to that?
No, that's it. I'm just really excited to play with these cards.
Well, nevertheless, that is our thoughts of the cards we're excited to brew around. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and enjoy future shenanigans. Nevertheless, this is LevDev, as well as Maciel and Aziel, signing out. Bada beep, bada boop.